All right. So we have a few people here with us. So Katherine Frederick is here with us tonight, and she works as a vegetation management ecologist for the Fairfax County Department of Public Works and Environmental Services, where she assists with stream restoration. She started managing invasive species in 2004 with the Fairfax County Park Authority's Invasive Management Area Program. Today, she'll be talking to us about the invasive species Oriental Bittersweet. I will turn it over to her. Please keep your mics off, and if you have any questions, you can put it into the chat box.
All right, great. Thank you so much for being here, and hopefully I can provide some helpful information to you. I love your organization and all that you do, so thank you for having me. I work within the stormwater management, within the stream restorations, and the first thing we do when a stream restoration is going to occur is we do a vegetation community evaluation and assessment, and that's both of native and invasive species. And the contractor will provide us with an invasive management plan that they intend to follow during their restoration. And prior to restoration, I will go in and do any kind of pre-treatment of any of the trees that are going to be saved and make sure there aren't any invasive vines, Oriental Bittersweet being one of them, so that those trees are less stressed than they normally would be with the restoration that occurs. And then during the stream restoration, the contractor will manage, not only do all their hydrology and their reassessing and making the riffles and all the engineering portion of it, they will also manage the invasive vegetation during it and within a warranty period after the restoration is completed. And then I follow up and make sure that the native plants that have been placed don't have any encroachments of invasive species. We want to make sure that they're able to establish themselves. And so of those, like I mentioned, often are the invasive vines. And so I'm going to talk about bittersweet, the history, the distribution, how it's been impacting various native species, the ways you can identify it, control methods, what you can do, and some alternatives that you could plant if you're interested. So the origin is, it's from Asia. And as you can see here, they talk about Korea, China, and Japan, and Eastern Asia. It was brought in as an ornamental, which often a lot of our invasive species were brought in as ornamentals or to establish a side of the road under construction. It is still sold. You can still buy this out at nurseries. And we find it often at old homesteads where it has unfortunately escaped from the landscaping. And dispersal is often by birds, but animals will also disperse it. And it's interesting that with some of those bird dispersal, some of the seeds have to go through a bird's gut to actually germinate. And you will often find invasive vines in junipers because the birds, there's this one site that there were all these invasive vines over it, and it's because the birds like to hang out and be protected in there, and then they drop the seeds and you have these invasive vines going. But they also have rhizomes, which are the root system, and that'll spread underground and then pop up another vine, another bittersweet vine. Or you have the stolons or runners, the horizontal stems going, and then they'll branch up again and climb up any tree or plant that they find. And then I also put land decorations or landscaping, people who have them in their yard, or I lived in Tennessee for a bit and I saw this person's doorway had bittersweet all around it for the fall decoration. And I talked to them and they said, oh yeah, we go up to New England every year and we collect bittersweet and bring it back down to Tennessee and put it along their door, not realizing that it can be dispersed, because oftentimes, unfortunately, people will take anything green, anything vegetation, their decoration like this, and just dump it in the adjacent woodland not realizing that they're spreading invasive seeds or smothering some spring ephemerals or anything like that. Oftentimes they think, well, green is green and it's all good, but there are repercussions to that. The dispersal is from Maine down to the Carolinas and west over to Wisconsin or Missouri. And you pretty much will find Oriental bittersweet everywhere. It prefers the sunny areas, but you'll find it in shaded woodlands, the meadows, the coast. And if you've had disturbed soil, oftentimes you will find invasive species, and bittersweet will be one of them. So for me, the main impact is what you see here in this picture of bittersweet just girdling, corkscrewing around a tree trunk and just cutting off the nutrients and water supply for that tree, and eventually kills it by that girdling. You can see how the bark is trying to grow around it, but I call them boa constrictors. You're out there and they literally look like boa constrictors sometimes. They will also smother. So when they grow all the way up to the top of the canopy, you have and the storm is coming in, the leaves covering, and it gets very, very heavy. And so you have a lot more wind damage. When the winds come through, you've got that heavy vine up top. And so you have wind damage. The fact that it's smothering, it's taking the light. So it's taking the nutrients, it's taking the water, and it's taking the sunlight that the native species needs, or the tree that it's growing or shrub that it's growing on needs. And as you can see here, I also listed that it displaces native species and is often listed as a noxious weed in several states. So some of the characteristics, right here, I say, think boa constrictor. I mean, that looks like a snake. And so if you're walking through the woods and you see something corkscrewing around a tree, look closely. It could be Japanese honeysuckle, because that does the corkscrewing as well. Wisteria is really bad, but bittersweet has this speckled brown gray bark. So that's one indicator. The corkscrewing is another indicator. And when you're looking at the vines, that's what you're looking for. And they can get really thick and they can grow really, really tall, up to 60 feet. But what's really, once you pull up the root system and you see this orange color, as in the picture here, you know for sure you've got bittersweet. Bittersweet has that orange root. And so that's a characteristic that's often used. Just a side note, barberry is an invasive shrub that we pull. And when you pull that root system, it's really cool. It is a bright yellow. It is really, really neat. Barberry has these nasty thorns, and mice like to live underneath barberry. So you have a lot of Lyme disease issues if you have barberry. So I like people to know that if they have landscaping of barberry, there could be a higher population of ticks that are on the, anyway, I'm sidetracking. I'm supposed to talk about bittersweet, but seeing the orange roots makes me think of the yellow roots. So anyway, just that side note on barberry. So, and when you pull Oriental bittersweet, it's very important that you either bag it or you hang it up to dry, because if you were to just set that orange root down, it can reroot and it will continue to live and thrive. And then also, like the rhizomes that are underneath, they'll just sprout up wherever. So it's so important that when you are pulling, and I'm getting ahead of myself here, but you need to get as much of that root system as possible to make sure that you are controlling it. I might have to turn on my light here. Okay, make sure I get the right, okay. So leaves on Oriental bittersweet are not ones that you can always use as an indicator. Though I do, the one part that is consistent is this little point that you see in these leaves. There's usually a little point on the leaf, but some of the leaves are very round, some are elongated. And one thing, and with the vines, I talked about the corkscrewing. Another thing they do is this center picture is they'll send out a tendril, and you'll see this corkscrewing tendril. So when you're walking in the woods and you see this reaching tendril, look closely. Again, it could be honeysuckle, Japanese honeysuckle, but oftentimes it's Oriental bittersweet. And multiflora rose kind of does that too. It kind of reaches up and tries to grab onto something else and get to the light. But bittersweet often is that tendril that's just curling out. You can see it in both these center pictures of just how it twists and turns and reaches out. So that's a good characteristic to look for. The leaves, alternate, glossy, it varies. So it's not always one that you can identify it by, but the little tip, that little point that you see in this at the top of the leaf is a good indicator or identifier. The berries are easy to identify. It's got that red berry with the yellow shell encasing that pops open. They are present from autumn to midwinter. And as I mentioned earlier, the bird dispersal. But you can see how beautiful, and several of our invasive species are so beautiful that they are used in landscaping. But unfortunately, they don't stay there. So flowers, there's not a lot on this slide because I don't use the flowers as an indicator for identifying, but this is somewhat of a blurry picture. Sorry about that. But green blossoms and in clusters. And that's the one thing about the berries. If I go back to the berries a second, they're in clusters. You can find them in clusters. And that's the key when I get to show you the native version. The difference is you got the clusters when it's an invasive bittersweet and not in the native one. But not using the flowers as an identifier. So now controlling it. You're most likely going to have to combine methods because it depends on how dense the infestation is and how large the infestation is. Also, just how long has it been there? So if it's new growth, you can certainly pull it manually. Pull it up. It's easy, especially after a rain. But like I said, you need to make sure you bag that orange root because it will reroot. If there are any fruit present, any other berries present, you need to bag that because they will just germinate into another plant. And one thing to consider when dealing with invasive species, you may remove, like for garlic mustard or anything, you're pulling it, you're going to have to go back for 5 to 7 years and continue to pull because there is what we call a seed bank in that soil. So that's why you have to continually go back and you will see it will decrease. So mechanically, you can do a repeat cut. You can do this with multiflora rose as well. You repeat cut the same within the same season over and over and over, and you will exhaust that plant's energy and they won't be able to produce the fruit. So you're lessening that seed bank that's in the soil. The pictures that I have here, the center one on the bottom is Oriental bittersweet. And what's happened here, so there's chemical treatment. And this is a cut and paint, cut stump where they cut it and then you are able to just paint it right there. The one on the right is actually English ivy. And you can see just how thick it gets. We normally create what we call windows in the vines that are growing on the tree and you try to remove it. But if you're pulling off bark, you want to stop because pulling off bark opens up the tree to disease and insects, and that's not good for the tree. You're trying to help the tree by removing the invasive species. So you have to do this hack and squirt kind of chemical treatment that you see on the right-hand side. Now, bittersweet's a little different in the fact that it does that corkscrewing. So oftentimes you can cut it up high and you try to cut it as low as you can to the ground. First, you try to pull up the root system. And sometimes you can use a weed wrench or a root puller and pull and then readjust and pull some more of that root system. But if you can't get the root system out, you cut it and you have to apply herbicide. Otherwise, you're going to have 10 vines sprouting up from that one single that you just cut. So it's really important that if you're doing the cutting, that there's an herbicide applied to it. And you see the different foliar treat is when you are spraying a chemical on the leaf. And you always use a surfactant because the surfactant helps soak it into the leaf and down into the root system. The cut stump that gets drawn down into the root system. Oftentimes you'll do this just in the fall so that when they're getting ready to be dormant for the winter, they're sucking all their energy down into the root system. And so more of the chemical gets brought down into the root. And then basil bark is just an oil application on the outside of usually that's for trees, not so much sometimes with the bittersweet. So those are the different control methods that are used and that we have used. Some of the things that you can do. One is get educated like you are and let other people talk to other people, go on those walks and say, oh, see that corkscrewing? Well, that's a bittersweet and it'll choke out the tree, you know, educate other people. If you have anything on your own property, remove it. If you do want to keep the invasive, so I put invasive, English ivy, pachysandra, and vinca. It's invasive when it escapes into the woodland. It's the right plant in the right place. And oftentimes pachysandra or English ivy might be the only thing that can grow on that slope or in that shaded area. And that's fine if you keep it in your property, in your landscape bed. One thing you should know, and I digress, I'm going off tangent here, but in English ivy, you probably already learned this, but when it grows vertical is when it will mature and fruit, and then the birds eat it and disperse it. So it's really, really, really important to not let English ivy grow up trees for that reason, and also because it's harmful to the tree. It gets down into the bark and opens it up to disease and insects. Don't buy invasive or aggressive plants. And the more people go to the nurseries and say, hey, I don't want that. I want native species. I don't want that. What can you offer? What are your native species? What's the native alternative? The more they'll supply it for us. So that's supply and demand. Plant only natives. And the reason is it gives an ecological lift to our environment, to all the pollinators that we need. The pollinators need these native species. And then you can do some reporting to your HOA or the park saying, hey, I saw this bittersweet, or I saw this invasive vine in my HOA. Oh my gosh, the wisteria is going to pull down all of their canopy trees, and they're not going to have anything but multiflora rose and Japanese honeysuckle and wisteria in this one area. It's incredible. So help them to be proactive by helping to educate them or let them know your concerns. And then I just listed 2 apps here. The one on the bottom, EdMaps, it's a web-based mapping that we use more of EDRR, so early detection, rapid response. If you're out in the middle of the woods and you find this patch of, say, wavy leaf basket grass, hey, we want to pin that. We want somebody to get in there, take care of it so it doesn't spread and create this monoculture. So that's what EdMaps is. But what's a really fun one that you probably all are aware of anyway is iNaturalist. It's this one with the green with a little white bird is what it looks like on the app. And it's really fun. You can go out, you can take a picture of a frog or a lizard or a flower or a tree, and it will populate it and try to tell you what it is. If you're not good with identifying, you pull that out, you take a picture and you say, what do you see? And it'll give you those suggestions of what it is. And then you can keep that within your app and identify, I don't know who it is exactly, but they go in, they check and say, yeah, that's what you saw. Yes, you were right. Or we think it's this instead. So it's a fun app to have when you're out and about. You can learn all your different species. So, okay, so I'm almost to the end. I think it's your left, but you see the American bittersweet or the native bittersweet. The berry is very similar because it's got the red berry and the yellow shell. But what's really important to notice here is that it's at the end of the stem. It's not in a cluster, or like I pointed out earlier for the invasive one. So, and the berry is twice as big. So if you see something like this, you'll know that you have the native bittersweet. And then I just listed just a few. There are so many wonderful native vines that you can plant or have instead of Oriental bittersweet. You have the Virginia creeper on the bottom left, which has that beautiful coloring in the fall. You have trumpet creeper and crossvine and trumpet honeysuckle. So really, really pretty, great ecological lifts for the environment. So there's lots of alternatives. And these are just some of the resources that I used. I meant to hold it in place, but so the picture Plant Invaders of Mid-Atlanta Natural Area. This is a go-to book. They just printed a new version, and it lists a whole bunch of different invasive species that you want to make sure you are aware of and where they came from. It gives you everything, the history, the distribution, all of that. And then the other book I've got on the bottom here is Native Alternatives to Invasive Species. It's a really fun book that oftentimes when you're telling somebody, well, hey, you shouldn't do that, plant that invasive here, this is an alternative. So instead of that Bradford pear, well, you've got serviceberry, something like that. And then of the websites, DCR, the Department of Conservation and Recreation, that's the one we have our contractors hold, that they're accountable for. They go to that. Unfortunately, it is dated, and we often add additional invasive species we want them to track and take care of. And then the, I'm skipping through this, My Woodlot, that just had a really fun presentation that you can look through. And then Penn State, Blue Ridge, and the Invasive Plant Species Assessment Work Group, they have some wonderful fact sheets on all of the different invasive species. So you can get some really good fact sheets there if you want fact sheets to share with anyone. And that is what I have for you. Hopefully I did not talk too long. Those are my, that's my information where you can reach me if you have any questions past when we're done here. So at that, I'll open it up for questions.
Thank you so much. That was really
Hopefully I didn't talk too
informative.
fast.
Thank you. Bill 8 had a question, which is whether other invasive vines need to have their roots bagged.
Oftentimes, yes. Oftentimes, yes. Porcelain berry, wisteria. Wisteria is a tough one to pull up by the root anyway, though. So oftentimes, yes, it's just a good practice so you don't have that potential of rerooting. And I didn't mention this in my talk, but I work with the homeless shelters with Operation Stream Shield, or OSS. So when we work with them, oftentimes we will bag almost everything we pull and it will go to the incinerator, but it helps with collecting metrics on how much they've actually removed. So that's a little off from the question, but yes, most of them you do need to bag, the root systems and definitely the berries.
Or hang them up to dry.
Exactly.
A couple of other questions came in, and I'll take this opportunity to ask my own question, which how often have you actually seen American Bittersweet? When I started as an IMA site leader, basically I was told, don't worry about it because you're never going to find it. But have you ever found it?
No,
You've never found it.
I have not.
Okay.
No.
All right. Well,
It's just good to know
Makes
that
it
if you see it on the stem, you'll know for sure, okay, this isn't in a cluster. So it's a good indicator. But
Okay.
no, I've never.
All right. Well, if you haven't seen it, then I think
Yeah.
it's pretty safe.
Right.
Okay, so let's see. And Jack asked, are certain ground types more likely than others? For example, wetlands versus deep woods, or dry versus wet? I assume he means as a place where you're going to find the Oriental Bittersweet.
Yeah, they tend to be in the drier soil areas rather than wet, what I call wet feet. But they will and can grow there, but they tend to keep to the drier areas, but they do not care whether it's sunny or shady.
Yeah.
You'll find them anywhere.
Certainly found it in our floodplain. Not a problem for it.
Right.
All right. Grant wants to know how this and other invasives are being controlled along the highways.
That's a question for VDOT. So on any of our, I had a basin where I had to get a VDOT permit to go in and control the Bradford pear that, oh my gosh, and sometimes I sit there and go, why am I doing this? Because I'll look across the street and there's a whole field of them.
Hmm.
So you have to get a permit working within the roadway. I know that McLean, there's a organization in McLean that was attempting to get in touch with VDOT to take care of it, because driving along, you see all this bamboo, but that's a VDOT issue, and maybe that's a community issue that we keep letting them know, hey, we're concerned about this. We want something done. We don't want, but yeah, it's out of our hands.
Well, this is definitely part of the plan to figure out how to get funding for VDOT to take care of invasives, because every conversation I've ever had with them, they always say they only have funding for their primary mission, which is safe, roads for travelers and pedestrians. And of course, it's a little hard to argue with that, right?
Right.
If that's all they have funding for, I hope they do a good job at it.
Right.
So we need to work on that from a legislative standpoint to get the money to do that. But if people want to volunteer, if it's a place, they won't let you volunteer on a limited access highway. But if it's other places that are at all safe for you to volunteer, if you want to volunteer, you can get a permit. We had nice conversations with them, and they've made it quite easy.
Well, that's good. And it would be nice if they had a system where they had someone on staff that would set up the cones and give you that protected area, because you have this work day going on that whatever day, and you have the permission to go in and do that work. If they don't have the funds, you've got the people and the somebody who wants to do it, then help support that effort for sure. So it's nice you have a open communication with them started.
Yeah, it's very much the beginning. And so the more data we can acquire on this, the better. We haven't started, by the way, we haven't quite figured out exactly how to count the trees on VDOT land. Heidi and I were going to take a go at that, but then when the leaves came on, it actually became much harder to count. So our plan was to wait until the leaves fall off and do some counts along some of the highways so that we have some data to present.
That's wonderful. Yeah, because there's several areas in mind that the knotweed, I've taken care of some of the knotweed, and if we don't get a handle on it, it's just going to create this monoculture right along the edge, and it'll displace any other native species. And then we have the bamboo issue. I'm sure you've driven all around and you see the bamboo. Oh, look, there's some bamboo. Oh, there's some bamboo. And it's oftentimes within the VDOT right away. And that's going to become more of an issue. If we're expecting the community to take care of the bamboo within their own property, well, then we can certainly turn around and say, okay, we'll take care of it within the county or the VDOT or whatever.
Absolutely. And by the way, I have been told more than once that volunteers on public property may not use herbicides. But then I learned that actually is just sort of wishful thinking on VDAC's part and not actually a regulation.
So I failed to mention this, and I should have. The label is the law on these herbicides. So recently I had a restoration site. It's actually on private property, and we've got very good communication with that property owner, and he wanted to go out and buy some rodeo and just have at it with the bamboo. And it's like, whoa, time out. No. Did you read the label? That the type of herbicide he had was not what you use on bamboo. It was basically for weeds within your driveway or sidewalk or whatnot. So I would suggest you make sure you have an applicator who is certified and trained. Because if you want the results, you need to be following the label and or making sure it's an applicator who is certified. Now, if it's in park, I know with park property or county property, they're not gonna be having volunteers applying.
They don't care what the regulations are, they just don't allow it. And that was one of Lynn's questions. And so that's the answer to that. And in Fairfax County Parkland, we are not allowed to apply it, for sure.
But so like OSS works over at ECLP Park alongside their staff. So they will cut the vine and then the staff is right there to apply the herbicide. So you've got this team effort going where if you get the logistics in place, then like the VDOT, you got that staff in place who gets you set up and is overseeing it. So then you have the A-OK to do your work. Or you've got that herbicide person who's certified and allowed to do it. And then it's boom, 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 because you've got all these volunteers getting in there.
Yeah,
Anyway.
thanks. In fact, we're planning to do that in Clifton, where we just got a landscaping company to give us half off to have some certified guy follow us along when we're cutting the 190 trees in a certain area. The trees, but the vines.
Right.
Lynn also wanted to know what herbicide is used on the cut.
Glyphosate and triclopyr. Those are the main ones used for bittersweet. So, but it's usually it's a 2% and or surfactant in when it's a foliar treatment. But all of this, definitely check the labels and or get an applicator who's certified.
Right. Okay. So let's see. Bill also wanted to know whether the native bittersweet would kill trees as well.
So I find that our native species, I get volunteers out there, I get contractors out there that when they're cutting the invasive vines, they're like, oh, we're going to cut the grape too. And we're going to cut the English ivy and the poison ivy and I'm like, no. So it's very interesting. In fact, I took an awesome picture today of this ginormous, beautiful grapevine that obviously had grown up right along with this tree and they were both doing fine. So having not ever seen a native Oriental bittersweet, I can't speak to that, but I can speak to the fact that given the opportunity, the native vines do not, for the most part, hurt the native species that they're growing up with. I do understand that if you've got young trees that have just been planted and then you get the Virginia creeper or whatever on it, that may be an issue. So you need to be able to allow your new sapling a chance to grow a little bit. So it depends case by case, but for the most part, the native species are not damaging the native vines are not damaging the native species they're growing on. I will say though, if you've got construction that comes through and then you've got these trees that are now exposed to wind and you might have some vines on them, then like you have the bittersweet adding weight, there could be that component, but you have to look at it as you also just change that habitat by opening them up to that wind that it didn't have before. Does that make sense?
That's interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. So there's other components that you need to consider and not just say, oh, no, all vines are bad. Because the berries that the poison ivy provides is just, it's good food. Whereas it's junk food if they're eating the bittersweet berries. It's like if they lived on potato chips and instead of having green beans and broccoli. And so
I think the native grape, the summer grape, will sometimes kill trees because I saw so many trees that looked like they'd been killed by it in Occoquan Bay National Wildlife Refuge. And I was astounded at that because we always thought, don't worry about the grape. But I see what you mean about being exposed because those trees are basically sort of loner trees. One loner tree after another is not in a forest. See that they get more light, so the grape got heavier. And
right.
anyway, it's just part of nature, right? It was like it's a trade-off.
Right. So you just kind of
your precious tree, you won't let it happen. But in the park, it's different.
Yeah, I was just there recently too, and was it wisteria that was there, or was it the bittersweet? Ginormous. It was
Shoot.
crazy.
A lot of Japanese honeysuckle there, unfortunately.
Yeah.
All right, who else has a question?
I will say it's very satisfying to get out there and cut it and then unwind it. And I was on this one work day with the OSS and I was going about, and I cut it and I started unwinding. I'm like, no, wait, you do it. It's so much fun. And the crew member started undoing it. And then he just had to stop because he was laughing so hard because I was so excited about it's just so satisfying saving these trees by unwinding and getting it. So you'll see it on when you're walking through the woods and you see what almost looks like a burn mark, or that's because it had an invasive vine on it, whether it was honeysuckle or bittersweet. And I don't know, it's just, to me, it's fun. And it's nice to save the trees. And it's so much better to save what we already have and take care of what we already have. And it's great to plant trees too, obviously. But we should be able to take care of what we already have as well. So if you don't mind, I can grab that one book. It's right here on this bookshelf and I can show you what the cover looks like. Would that be okay? Of the native alternatives? Okay, just let me grab that for you. It should be right here.
Would it be okay if I ask a question that instead of writing it in the text? I think.
Yes, Lynn, go ahead.
So Kathy, I'm curious, I'm just tackling an area that is completely covered with bittersweet in one of the parks. And so my attempt is, of course, to go try and cut everything. What's the most efficient way to tackle a large area? Is it to try and just keep chopping at everything a little bit, or to take one area and focus and get one area clean and move to the next? I mean, we're talking about, 100 yards of road front. It's not enormous, but I just, what's the best strategy?
So right now, because the berries aren't present, if you can cut that source so the berries aren't produced this year, that would be beneficial. If you have young saplings, easy pull. So that's easy. Yeah, my main thing is
some vines that are easily bigger than my arm, and I've tried to whack those, but as much as I think I cut, I drive by and I love to see all the dead stuff, but I keep seeing more and more, and I keep thinking maybe I should focus on a smaller piece. But it sounds like try to reduce as much of the seeds as possible, as quickly as possible, and then just keep working in.
right.
Okay.
Yeah, I would agree.
All right,
I
thank
would
you.
agree. You're welcome. This is the book. I don't know if it's in focus for you.
Nope.
Does that help at all?
Your fingers are in focus, but the book won't focus.
That's interesting. Okay, so
Yeah, that's because your background is blurred. Unblurred.
okay.
There we go. You did it. Very nice.
So you see what that is?
Yep.
Oh, but I ruined it.
Native alternatives to invasive plants.
So this is wonderful. No matter what you're working on, it will give you some great alternative suggestions. So if you're, yeah, so that's the book I was talking about for alternatives with a different invasive species. So.
Okay, great. Well, if there are no other questions, what's that? May put that in. Oh, put that in the chat. Where do we get the book?
Good question. This was back when I was with the IMA program. So I started, so to give you a little more background on me, Megan Fellows, my colleague, started the invasive management area program. And this was back in 2004. And so I was basically her first volunteer coordinator in 2004. And I was with the program for the first 5 years. And we had 20 IMA leaders at that time. And we were able to double it. And I would go out twice a week with my volunteer botanists, and they were fabulous. And we would collect data both of the native and the invasive species on in these IMA program and the IMA sites. And then, and at that point, my position was a limited term position, and we created, we showed enough data how important this program was and is. And so they made it my position a merit position, and I moved to Tennessee. So then I was in Tennessee for about 6-7 years, worked down there with the zoo, and then came back up here. And my colleague again, Megan Fellows and Charles Smith, we're now where we are now with the stormwater management. And they said, we could use your help again with more invasive treatments and management. And so I said, okay, sure. So that's where I am now. But so to go back to the book, this was a book that we provided to our IMA leaders as a thank you one year. So yeah, but to where I can look and see if I can figure that out and send it to Heidi or Margaret so they can share it with the group. So I'll follow up with that and see if there's any way. I
Found
can
it on
figure that out.
Amazon, but they want $48 for it.
So there are like thrift, like my daughter works in the book publishing world, so I'll ask her, because sometimes you can get the these like at other publishing companies. So
Yeah, I might want to look somewhere else besides Amazon.
yeah, that's ridiculous. So I'll check. I'll check into it and see if I can get something better for you, a better rate.
Okay, thanks. And of course, you know, this is what Plant Nova Natives is all about. So check the website, everyone.
Yeah.
All right, great. So before we go, did anyone have any other comments about the tree rescuer program, or questions or thoughts, suggestions? This is our last webinar.
Ooh,
And a very good way to end it. Thank you.
you're welcome.
Okay, well, I know for myself, when we've had a couple events recently where we plan to show people how to ID the vines and then go out and do some cutting for practice, and the poison ivy stopped us. So a lot of this cutting is going to need to wait until the leaves are off. But
Yes.
it's still a good time to go out and count the vines in the neighborhoods and drop off the brochures. But now we have door hangers, which are way easier. We have them in hand, and if anyone has brochures and would like to actually get door hangers instead, we'd be happy to mail them to you. Just need to let us know.
Well, that's great.
Yeah.
So did anyone give us talk about Japanese honeysuckle?
Yep. We have
Good.
talk on all these vines.
Yep, that's great, because it's an easy one to identify even in the winter. And most of the invasive species are first in and last out. So
Yeah, that's right.
yeah, that's good.
All right, great. Well, thank you so much, Kathy, and thank you everybody for attending.
Thanks, Margaret. Thanks, Kathy.
You're welcome. Thank you. We made it through the storm.
Yeah, we did. That was lucky.
Yep, that's great. Thank you.
All right.
Thanks,
Bye-bye,
Greg.
Appreciate it.
everybody.
Thanks
Bye.
all.
Bye.
Bye.